No Republican is ever killed for being too Republican, being too right-wing. Only the freaking Democrats run away from their most strident party members.
That the Pelosi's of the world are still bitter after all this time at the Justice Democrats. Like, they've crushed them already. Jamal Bowman, Cori Bush are out, Marie Newman's out, the rest have bowed their heads. But it's not enough. Mama Bear's still mauling them while they think Mama Bear's their friend.
This idea that you can be dynamic and reach a mass audience with, these freaking people that you gotta wheel across the damn stage or on crutches, and they basically gotta eat in public with a damn bib on. I think that's a problem.
Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez told her fellow Democrats that she might stop supporting primary challengers to Democratic incumbents in her attempt to chair the House Oversight Committee. Now, the reporting comes from Politico, which cited 3 people familiar with her remarks. So how well did that strategy work out for her? Let's take a look.
I want to talk about this fight inside the Democratic Party between the old and the new guard over this key committee seat. It was settled today when Representative Gerry Connolly was voted the top Democrat on the Oversight Committee, beating out Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The tally came down not particularly close, 131 to 84.
Oops. Now, it's worth noting that AOC won her seat in the House of Representatives by, challenging an incumbent Democrat. Okay, that was Joe Crowley, and this happened back in 2018. Again, this means that she won her seat in Congress by challenging a Democratic incumbent. That was the whole point of the Justice Democrats. So the idea that she was willing to concede to the Democratic establishment and say that she will no longer support primary challengers to Democratic incumbents is particularly rich and also very disgusting. But maybe complying is how leaders lead, or maybe leaders lead without complying or bending to the will of the establishment that she was elected to fight in the first place.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I know what the point of the Just Democrats was, since I helped found it and I named it, and we set the rules in the first place. And number one rule, only rule we had, was you can't take corporate PAC money, because we didn't want them getting sucked into the corruption in Washington. Now, that has worked in a lot of ways, and a lot of the members of the Just Democrats have spoken out strongly against Israel and sending money over there. They've done some great work in other regards as well, and I appreciate that, and that's great. And we always speak out based on the facts on the ground. So when we agree with different members of the Just Democrats, we say it, and we say it enthusiastically. And when we disagree, we also say that. Why? Because we're in the news business and we cover the news honestly, okay? So in this case, I thought AOC would be good to replace Connolly, because Connolly's, I think, 74, she's 35. She's much better in media, much better in asking questions in these committee hearings, and this is oversight where we need someone strong and aggressive to actually serve that role. I thought she was a good fit for that role, so that made a lot of sense. But I didn't know that she was apparently telling, if Politico is right, that she's telling people, don't worry, I won't support any more challenges of incumbents. Well, that defeats the whole point. The point of Justice Democrats was to send in people to challenge those incumbents, to challenge the establishment, and to open the door for others so that more progressives and populists could go into Congress and we could actually topple the establishment and take over. The point wasn't to go inside and become part of the establishment and go up the ranks for your own benefit. Because if you say you're not going to challenge incumbents anymore, then there's no point. They have a massive lead in terms of the numbers of congressmen that they have. The establishment Democrats have 95% of the party. If you freeze it in place now, we will be a permanent minority. Why would you agree to that? Strategically, it makes no sense at all for the movement, but for your own career, it does make some sense. And because then all your colleagues are much nicer to you, you get along better with them, you make up pretty excuses about why you had to do it, you get a better position, it allows you to run for a higher office one day, etc. But if this was about you, then it was a giant mistake. because I don't care about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or any of the other Justice Democrats on a personal level. I don't mean that in a mean way. Whenever I've interacted with them personally, I've liked them. We've got along great before weird things happened, right? But it's not my job to promote their egos or careers. I don't care about that. What I care about is passing bills. And we cannot pass these bills. And I thought we agreed when we challenged those Democratic incumbents together that we cannot pass those bills if we don't defeat the establishment. So why aren't they passing paid family leave? That's polling at 84%. If you actually fought on that, it would be so easy to win. I know that in Congress they tell you everything is impossible, don't ever fight back. But when you agree to not fight back, when you agree not to challenge your own colleagues, you're saying I'd rather be comfortable than effective. And that defeats the entire point.
Well, that comfort came in the form of AOC losing 131 to 84. And so, look, it's been widely reported that former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi was working behind the scenes to ensure that AOC would lose this bid to chair the House Oversight Committee, which made me think of something that AOC had to say about Nancy Pelosi back in 2020 when she made an appearance on The View. If you don't know what I'm referring to, this is it.
I think there's a lot of incentive to blow up disagreements in the party as like huge fights, because I think it's important for us all to recognize, and we do this in our rallies, to recognize the people who have been in this fight to allow us to have this window as we do right now. You know, Nancy Pelosi, that's Mama Bear of the Democratic Party. You know that.
Well, according to Ken Klippenstein's reporting, Mama Bear whipped votes for the challenger to AOC to chair the House Oversight Committee by whipping votes, even as she was struggling with a hip replacement surgery following a fall that she suffered from. So we should point out that Pelosi's word is not necessarily law. So for instance, an ally of AOC noted that another Pelosi-backed candidate, Representative Jim Costa from California, lost the steering vote to lead the Agriculture Committee on Monday, telling Axios, does it help or does it hurt to have Nancy Pelosi making calls for you? But when it came to the House Oversight Committee, Mama Bear did get her way. And so that's despite concerns over Connolly's age and health. And this part of the story, in my opinion, like blows my mind even more, Cenk, because this is who Nancy Pelosi was rooting for. This is who Nancy Pelosi wants to have as chair of the House Oversight Committee. So Connolly's trademark vigor made headlines comfortable that he can take on the Trump administration despite his age and recent cancer diagnosis, multiple lawmakers told Axios. Okay, here's what the reality is. So Connolly disclosed on November 7th that he has cancer. It's esophageal cancer, which he's currently undergoing chemotherapy treatments for. Now, Ken Klippenstein spoke to medical experts who told him that the survival rate for this specific form of cancer is extremely low. Also, the chemotherapy treatments obviously are just brutal. And despite all this, one of Connolly's top allies, Representative Don Bayer, laughably argues, Gerry's a young 74, cancer notwithstanding.
Yeah, he's young and dynamic behind the scenes. He's young and dynamic in the hospital. Look, guys, I feel terrible for him. And these guys, you got to retire at some point. Take care of yourself, brother. We want you to be better. Of course we do. But while you're in the middle of chemo is probably not the best time to lead the Oversight Committee. So what that shows you is that the Pelosi's of the world are still bitter after all this time at the Justice Democrats. Like they've crushed them already. Jamal Bowman, Cori Bush are out, Marie Newman's out, the rest have bowed their heads, but it's not enough. Mama Bear is still mauling them while they think Mama Bear's their friend, right? So look, that appearance had 3 different problems in that tiny little clip that we showed you. She said, we don't need huge fights in the Democratic Party. No, you're totally wrong. We definitely need huge fights. In fact, when AOC was running against Joe Crowley was one of the top 4 Democrats in the House. And you know what they said? Why is she getting primaried? We don't need these huge fights in the Democratic Party.
Right.
And back then, when she was the beneficiary of that fight, she was all for it. And And look, guys, this is not a recent thing. I know that fairly soon after she won and got into Congress, when other Just Democrats, not me, went and talked to her and asked her to help primaries against incumbents, it was like pulling teeth. Instantly like, whoa, but that's gonna get me shunned. Who cares? Who cares? What did you think we were gonna do a polite revolution? And then if you asked politely of Mama Bear, she was gonna be like, oh yeah, my $1 billion in donors, I'll ignore them because you're so pleasant to me, right? And the second thing she says, they need to allow us this space. No, they don't need to allow anything. When you were running against Crowley, did you ask his permission before you kicked his ass? No, you didn't. You did a great job. You ran an unbelievable race, and you pulled off one of the greatest upsets in American history. That should have been a sign you keep going further. I don't mean like radical policies. I mean the fight for policies that everyone agrees with, except your corporate beloved colleagues who are so intensely corrupt, right? And so I know these are not allowed to be said. Kamala Harris took $774,000 from the health insurance industry and then didn't fight against the health insurance industry in this campaign. No, you're not allowed to say it, those beloved colleagues. And then, look, my sense of handling this is Mama Bear is always going to do what she's going to do. And if you think, there's only two possibilities. Either you're intensely naive and you think she's going to turn around and help you when it makes no sense and has never been her pattern, or you think, I know she's not gonna help me. I know that fighting these guys is the right thing to do, but I don't wanna do it. It's uncomfortable. Listen, you should adopt Mystical's attitude. If you see me fighting a grizzly bear in the woods, help the bear, because that guy's gonna need it, okay? He says a different word than guy, but then they'd get on my case if I said that. All right, anyways. So go fight, but she won't. I mean, after this, she goes, okay, I'll never challenge you guys. And they deny her anyway. I told you it never works. Beseeching them and pleading with them never works. And you know what? As soon as they can, they're gonna push you out of the party. And then you're gonna be shocked and chagrined. You're gonna be totally surprised by it. Fight back, but you probably won't because it's uncomfortable.
The other thing that I will say is about AOC, she has been demonized by the right. And she's been demonized as this like too progressive, far left person. And I want to try to set the record straight, because if she is too progressive, then the Democrats really are going to lose the working class.
Joe Biden, he did not retire early enough so that there could be an open, what do they call it, primary.
There was a fascinating discussion over at The View today, and it had to do with something that transpired in regard to a leadership battle for the House Oversight Committee. And that leadership battle was between progressive Democratic lawmaker Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and a more moderate centrist Democrat, and that was Democratic Representative Connolly, right? So there was a vote on that issue, and it turns out that behind the scenes, you had former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi essentially whipping votes against AOC to ensure that Congressman Connolly would be the Democratic leader within that House Oversight Committee. And so it's nice hearing Sunny Hostin defend Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, because I recall the days when corporate media, for the most part, was siding with Nancy Pelosi and trashing members of the squad, progressive members of Congress. But that's not the case in this conversation. So that was surprising. But I also thought it was interesting when Sunny Hostin specifically listed what AOC's values are. The list was interesting, and what wasn't in the list was also interesting. So without further ado, let's watch more of Sunny Hostin's commentary on AOC.
This is her platform. The key issues: healthcare for all people, affordable housing, rebuild the unions, federal job guarantee, free public college, create clean energy jobs, pay parental leave, and expand protections for the LGBTQ+ community. If that is too progressive for this country, then that's a problem for the Democrats, and that's a problem, quite frankly, for this country.
That used to be a description of a liberal.
But the devils are
Medicare,
also
healthcare for all should be an everybody issue.
So I thought that list of policy goals that AOC certainly does hold was a good list for the most part. And, what I thought was interesting was that Sunny Hostin is smart enough to understand that those are policies that tend to have broader appeal among the electorate. I mean, there is a reason why there's this populist wing of the Republican voting base right now. And certainly that has existed among the left for forever. But, she understands that the economic stuff really appeals to people. And she just kind of downplayed some of the more, I think like social justice, social policies that AOC talks about. But I think what AOC does correctly is that she manages to balance her messaging on both, as opposed to only focusing on the social stuff and then engaging in like scolding people if they're not completely on board with what she wants for that stuff. Because I think that's what's kind of turned some people off on the left. But I'm curious what you think about that, Waz.
I think The View, they've been on a roller coaster, right? They were anti-Biden getting pushed out, and Biden is fine. He's not too old, and all right. And then they became Kamala coconuts overnight, and they loved the coconut Kamala. And they went crazy for that, and they were just so sure she was gonna win. And I think, unlike a lot of people, Morning Joe, they're like a little bit self-reflective as to what happened in the last election. I think that's one, that they understand that they need to be more self-reflective. And two, I think what you're seeing, honestly, Anna, is the power of celebrity. AOC is a celebrity. She is a star. She counts for a star in the Democratic Party in 2024. And it doesn't take a genius to be like, wait a second. This is one of the few stars we've produced. This woman stands for all of the right things that any Democrat, any self-professed liberal, you go to a cocktail party, it's like, you know what, man? We need to get the people some health care. You know what, man? The people are complaining about the rents being too high. Like, any freaking lib could accept those as, respectable issues that should be platformed. So I think what these women at The View are saying is like, what's the harm and the foul here? Like, what did AOC do to not deserve this promotion when, she vice chaired this same committee? She's put in all the work. Again, one of the things you want these people to do is to be able to go, use the megaphone and actually spread your positions far and wide. AOC has demonstrated an ability to do that. Like, liberals are obsessed with qualifications. She qualifies.
Totally.
But there's just no two ways about it. I think the women of The View are expressing this obvious, opinion.
Now we're going to go to Alyssa Farah Griffith in just a minute, because she did have a rebuttal for Sunny Hostin that I think is worth listening to. But you make a really great point, Waz, because remember, Congressman Gerry Connolly, he's up there in age. He's 74 years old, and he also has esophageal cancer, which has a very low survival rate. I hate talking about that because it's brutal, and I don't want anyone to think I'm attacking him. But the point is, there's this unwillingness by older leadership in Congress, in the Democratic Party specifically, to step aside and allow for younger, newer leadership that's a lot more energetic, better at communicating. And you're right. I mean, AOC has proven herself to be a far better speaker and promoter of the, values and policies that the Democratic Party purports to want to champion and pass. And so with that in mind, I want to go to J4 here. This is Alyssa Farah Griffith responding to critique about how AOC's policies are too radical, like radical left. Obviously, Sunny Hostin disagrees with that, and that's why she listed the economic policies. But Farah Griffith wasn't going to let her get away with that. So let's take a look.
But the devil's in the details, because a lot of this country does not support, for example, the Green New Deal, which would absolutely crush jobs across this country, wreak havoc on the economy.
It would create millions of jobs, actually.
It would actually make international travel virtually impossible to do because of some of the regulations that have been in place. Universal health care. You should have, of course, anyone who needs emergency coverage, people should have catastrophic coverage, but most Americans think they want to have some choice and optionality in their health care. There's a reason Obamacare did not have the public option. That's not where the majority of the country is. I would argue that AOC is definitely too left for the majority of the country.
So I disagree with what Alyssa Farah Griffin said there. So first of all, like the Green New Deal was such a massive piece of legislation. I mean, which provisions are we talking about here? And look, I've been on the record and people have gotten mad at me. I don't care. I'm going to say it again. If you write climate-related legislation in a way that puts the financial burden on individual Americans, yeah, they're not gonna like it, okay? If it becomes this like super expensive burden on ordinary American workers and they're forced to buy certain cars or replace certain appliances in their home without any real government support. And when I say real government support, I'm not just talking about tax credits, okay? Take your tax credits and you can shove it. Okay, tax credits is like, oh, you might, a certain portion of your income might be tax deductible. It's not good enough, okay? Because people have to pay for things up front, and a lot of American families can't afford that. So if it has to do with provisions that are written in that way, I can see those provisions being unpopular. But to just say the Green New Deal is unpopular, okay, well, what's your evidence of that? And which parts of that massive bill are you referring to? The other thing is, what is she talking about with the healthcare? So she says, yeah, so I'm gonna let you jump in with that, Waz, because that got you heated.
First of all, Medicare, one of the most popular government programs in existence. Seniors are never saying, oh, I'd like more choice with my med. I'd like to have more private choices. Like, no, like the government is taking care of my bills. I think that's crap. But I think the thing that never gets said when these discussions are happening, particularly with progressive or left Democrats, is no Republican is ever killed for being too Republican, being too right wing. In fact, when you get killed as a Republican, they call you a rhino. They say you're Republican in name only, meaning you're not Republican enough. You're not hardcore enough. That's when you get killed as a Republican. Only the freaking Democrats run away from their most strident party members. Nobody ever says, oh, this person needs to never be seen again. This person needs to have, put dirt in their skis when they're ascending because they're seen as too conservative. No, so I just think it's nonsense that this idea that AOC is just too left for the country. It's like, no, fam, as a party, y'all need to be making the case for your left policies to the country. Not this idea that somebody like AOC is quote unquote too left. No, all of those things that she mentioned, if you guys actually cared about it, you could go out and make a case for it to the American people. And this nonsense that somebody like AOC or somebody else is quote unquote too left, too crazy, too freaky, too liberal is nuts. I just don't buy it.
Yeah, I mean, look, it really depends on what you're making the case for. And when you hear members of the Democratic Party argue that someone like AOC is too left wing, again, it really depends on what they're referring to. But when it comes to Democratic members of Congress, putting that allegation out there, that criticism out there, they are talking about what her economic values are. And it's not that the American people would find those proposals too far left per se, but the corporate donors would. That's for sure. So that's what they're referring to.
I think the party needs to concede, retire, enjoy the rest of your life.
What is about this?
Let them be leadership.
Gerontocracy seems like it's intractable.
Why not have an AOC and a Jasmine Crockett who, quite frankly, are never scared?
Never.
Of Donald
and
Trump or
communicate
Republicans.
with regular people about regular things. I mean, AOC and Jasmine Crockett are probably two of their best communicators.
We need messengers to make sure that people are paying attention to all these hearings on Capitol Hill, to communicate to voters. I don't agree with what Bernie Sanders said, that we've abandoned the working class people. No. We actually are the party of working class people.
It's a new day in America, folks, where you have someone like Joy-Ann Reid on MSNBC criticizing the Democratic Party. Hear, hear. Now, of course, this has to do with the Democratic leadership, in this case in the House, refusing to kind of step aside and allow for younger members of Congress to take the reins, to serve in leadership roles. And to be more specific, this week we learned that while AOC, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, was trying to win a leadership role in the House Oversight Committee, Nancy Pelosi was behind the scenes whipping up votes against her to ensure that a more moderate Democrat, Representative Gerry Connolly, who's 74 years old and is currently suffering from cancer, would be named the leader, Democratic leader of this committee instead. And so I'm real curious to get your thoughts, Waz, because for the most part, I mean, I agreed with what Joy Reid was saying, and I don't agree with her often these days.
I rarely agree with Joy-Ann Reid when it comes to what the Democrats are doing or what they should be doing and what's right and what's wrong. But I think it's obvious that everybody understands this gerontocracy situation is bad. It's bad for business. Like this idea that you can be dynamic and reach a mass audience with, these freaking people that you got to wheel across the damn stage or on crutches, and they basically got to eat in public with a damn bib on. I think that's a problem. And I'm not trying to be ageist here, but just look at it looks insane. And then, when they come out and say like, oh, we're the party that has the best interest of the country and blah, blah, blah. And they do this stuff like just nakedly grab for power at every single turn. Like everybody knows that's the wrong move. What I will say, man, and if you ever watch a Nancy Pelosi interview and she's talking about her machinations behind the scenes, she's a freaking mob boss. And I think what she would say to AOC is, why don't you whip up the votes? Okay? You don't have the power, so shut up. You got to take the power. Basically, they're saying, you got to kill us yourselves at the ballot box. You got to have more progressives in the caucus so that, these freaking corporate, moderate, centrist, whatever euphemism we want to call these Democrats, so that we can actually defeat them.
That's such a great point, Waz, because so far AOC has tried the approach of cozying up to people like Nancy Pelosi, calling her mama bear, complimenting her. She came in, she got voted into Congress to fight the Democratic establishment. And in the very beginning, she did. But she caved to them pretty quickly. And look, I can imagine how uncomfortable it is to find yourself in a workplace that's incredibly hostile toward you. But that's what you got voted in for. And so no one is going to hand her a leadership position, because right now, the standard operating procedure for the Democratic Party in Congress is we have protocols. Seniority is the number one priority. You have to pay your dues and you have to wait your turn. And understand that's all about their own sense of entitlement. It's not about what is best for constituents, what is best in terms of securing policy wins that Democrats purport to want to pass. It's all about this person's waited their turn. It reminds me of what happened with Hillary Clinton in the 2016 election.
Yeah.
Right? All of the games that were being played during that Democratic primary, not to ensure that the best possible candidate was going to run against Donald Trump, but to ensure that someone who was really rising, skyrocketing in popularity at the time, of course, Senator Bernie Sanders, wouldn't have a chance, right? I remember all the little games that they played. It's just incredible because, of course, there were a lot of denials about those strategies to essentially prevent Sanders from winning the primary. But then during this past election cycle, all of a sudden you have Democratic lawmakers who came out and just totally admitted it on cable news.
Yeah, and you know what? I think about the other side, and we've talked about this on the show, and about like what Matt Gaetz and them could do in the freaking House caucus, where on the Republican side, where they could have a direct hand in picking the freaking speaker. Okay, I think part of that is their megaphone, man. Like they could get certain political, conservative media entities to echo what they're saying. Like I think AOC got to get on the horn. She got to try to get them folks at the New Yorker and the New Republic and the, God forbid, the Atlantic and New York Times. Like you got to find a way to get in there to put a pressure campaign on these establishment Dems and just talk about like, yo, you guys are taking all these L's. And the idea that you could sit around and be this arrogant and stubborn about holding on to power till the bitter end, she's got to be a little bit more politically savvy, honestly, about
little
this,
Machiavellian,
yeah,
right?
100%, because it's not going to work from just doing it on the quote unquote merits.
100%. Now, I want to go to one more video here, and this is Chris Hayes, also a host over at MSNBC.
But in light of everything that has happened over the past decade, it does feel like Democrats still have not learned a pretty important lesson here. In April of last year, President Joe Biden announced he was running for re-election, even though he was the oldest man to ever serve as president and was also clearly having a hard time communicating at the level necessary to occupy the bully pulpit. It wasn't until over a year later, when Biden gave a cataclysmic performance in his first debate with Donald Trump, that the Democrats changed course. You would think that would have been enough for Democrats to start taking the age issue seriously. But it was not. Gerry Connolly won that vote today. And he did so thanks in part to former Speaker Nancy Pelosi whipping votes for him. Pelosi whipped votes to make sure that Connolly got the oversight job over the young star in the party, even as the 84-year-old Pelosi is recovering from hip surgery after suffering a fall. It feels like a moment of genuine madness.
Yeah, because it is. And dude, Pelosi needs to retire, but I just, look, I think that Chris Hayes raises a super important question. Has the Democratic Party learned a damn thing from this past election? And I remember, before you answer, Waz, I remember having a conversation with Cenk behind the scenes in the lead up to the election, because I told him, I'm like, look, I know people are getting excited about some of this polling and stuff. I remember it was like after the Ann Seltzer thing came out. And I'm like,
the Iowa joint, yeah.
Yeah, the Iowa poll. I'm like, no, I don't buy this poll at all. But in saying that, I was like, look, there's a possibility that if Democrats lose this election, it might wake them up and make them realize things need to change. It might force them into some self-reflection. It doesn't seem like that's happening, at least not with the leadership.
It's definitely not. I don't know if you saw in the New York Times I think it was yesterday, where the DNC chair, the black dude, is like, well, actually, we had some down ballot wins and all isn't lost. And it's like,
cope.
You can't be serious. But to what Chris Hayes was saying, who, by the way, I always thought Chris Hayes was one of the few good ones at MSNBC. He's got some he's got some progressive instincts. I've never minded Chris Hayes, and so I'm not surprised that he's bringing this up. But like, you show that picture of Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi, like these people are so cooked. And what I love too about this is AOC, I think, is very illustrative of what's going on politically these days. I think these chart-wielding quants in the Democratic Party, they want to show you their chart and be like, well, actually, blah, 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 blah. And when AOC held the Q&A, when she was like, hey, why did you guys vote for me and Donald Trump? Basically, what she got back is like, we believe you guys believe what you're saying. We think you're a genuine person. We may not agree with you on every single subject that you're passionate about, but we really believe these are things that you hold true and dear. And you're not some corporate shill, and we love you for that. Like that, nobody's like, oh, I can't. This issue doesn't poll well, and blah. It's like, no, like I don't need to be 95% in lockstep with the candidate that I vote for, but I would like to vote for a candidate who I think is a genuine, real human being and not an empty suit.
Yes.
And like, who's ever even heard of this Connolly guy? I mean, Jesus.
So true. No, that's such a great point. And look, you can't ignore the fact that one of the weaknesses of Kamala Harris, especially up against Donald Trump,
my God,
was the lack of authenticity. And love him or hate him, Donald Trump is authentic, okay? Like real authentic. I mean, the guy can't stop himself from talking and saying things that sometimes get him into a lot of trouble. But
and just the other day with the TikTok, and he said he reversed roles. He was like, yo, my son told me I was blowing up on TikTok. I'm like, hey, maybe this thing should stay around.
He's just like, look, there's something admirable about that transparency, because we're so used to politicians lying to us that when you have a politician just give it to you straight, even when they're like super self-interested and are making decisions based on themselves, right? It's like, all right, at least he's being honest. At least he's authentic. And with Kamala Harris, it was the same stump speech over and over again. She just gave it again. She just gave a speech, head up, shoulders back. I know. We heard that a billion times.
You're not excited about the opportunity economy?
No.
Whatever the hell that means?
Well, I didn't know what it was because it wasn't really explained to me or anyone else. So.
Hey, thanks for watching that video. We really appreciate it, guys. And we appreciate it if you become members, because that allows us to be independent, honest, progressive, all the things that you don't get from corporate media. And all of that is because of you guys. Hit the join button below and become one of us. Become a young Turk.